Understanding animists, evangelizing animists. Animism is a major mission field. We need to know how to take the gospel to people who are animists. So, on one of my overseas ministry trips, an in-flight documentary caught my attention. It must have been from National Geographic. I don't know who else would bring out such imbecilic programs, but I didn't see the title at the beginning. Some anthropologist was waxing eloquent about the incredibly advanced Mayan civilization of Central America in the 15th century. They didn't have a written language, but they were incredibly advanced. These Mayans built spectacular pyramid-like temples, all without the wheel. Of course, they did use slave labor to move all those massive stones, but the slaves were captured from neighboring tribes. I suppose that made all right. Unfortunately, these impressive temples were used for human sacrifices, but the human sacrifices were necessary to make the sun rise each day. But they only used slaves and prisoners captured from neighboring tribes. None of this seemed to have dampened the enthusiasm of this anthropologist as he eagerly described the amazing, complex, intricate Mayan civilization. You might recall predicted the end of the world in 2012. They couldn't see the coming of the Spanish, which was the end of their world, but they apparently predicted the end of the world in 2012. Which there's a lot of excitement about in 2012, but as you know, we're still here. They had a fascinating sport which was a cross between our basketball and football, although you could only use your shoulder to score a goal. Unfortunately, the losing team was all put to death. And so it carried on. I could only wonder at the mental and ethical gymnastics of this anthropologist and this film presenter in order to praise the incredibly advanced Mayan civilization, which is, as sickeningly repetitive a mantra as the peaceful and tolerant religion of Islam, which had not yet discovered the wheel. I mean, the Mayans hadn't discovered the wheel. They didn't have a written language. They used slave labor. They engaged in human sacrifice, wholesale human sacrifice. They routinely executed the losing sports teams, but we're meant to be impressed with these creeps. I think Mel Gibson's Apocalypto should be required viewing for all anthropology students at university. This will be the antidote to this mindless love affair with paganism, which we have so many in our universities. They just think it's so great. None of us would want to live under this kind of situation that the poor people, especially the neighboring tribes to the Mayans, had to endure. Slave raids, human sacrifices, ripping, beating hearts out of victims, and all the rest of it. My all-time favorite cover of Time magazine, or should we say Slime, Lost Tribes, Lost Knowledge. When native cultures disappear, so does a treasure trove of scientific and medical wisdom. During a visit to the Field Museum in Chicago, I saw a display of reverence for paganism. Part of the exhibit included this cover of this old-time magazine, Lost Tribes, Lost Knowledge. The cover pictures of a primitive tribesman from Papua New Guinea with a bone through his nose. Subtitle, Treasure troves of scientific knowledge are being lost by tribes going extinct. Now I wondered what scientific knowledge could be possessed by tribes without a written language. But close examination revealed that these tribes are going extinct because of the work of Christian missionaries, and they named specifically the worst culprits being New Tribes Mission, which is one of my favorite missions, and Wycliffe Bible translators. As these tribes are being evangelized and come to Christ, they abandon the old tribal religions of headhunting, cannibalism, spirit worship, and polygamy. To the scientists, the tribes are going extinct because they no longer walk around naked, they no longer engage in body piercing and body scarification and tattooing. Now they wear clothes and glasses, and they go to a doctor instead of a witch doctor. And they're learning to read and only get married once, and they worship in church. How terrible is that? Now, being somewhat ignorant of the science of anthropology, I would have thought that ending intertribal warfare was good. I would have thought ending cannibalism was good. I would have thought that ending polygamy and occultism was good. I would have also assumed that giving people a gift of literacy and medicines to improve their life expectancy and health, actually trebling their life expectancy, I would have thought giving people better eyesight with glasses and bringing them the life-transforming gospel of Christ was all preferable to allowing them to languish in superstitious ignorance and animistic fear. But no. As National Geographic articles bemoan the cultural genocide. Cultural genocide? What is that? New Tribes Mission, other pioneer missions in the Amazon jungle are guilty of cultural genocide, they say. They point out that these missionaries are destroying the cultural distinctives of unique tribal cultures. Apparently, it is preferable to have illiteracy and polygamy and incessant tribal warfare and cannibalism and human sacrifices and slavery and high infant mortality and low life expectancies, of course, not to mention people dying without the knowledge of Christ. Just so that journalists and anthropologists can have the more interesting and financially lucrative photo ops of naked savages engaging in body scarification and the eating of their neighbors. Romans 1:21, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, neither gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Is that not something you could write over the doors of the average anthropology department and Sodom on the Hillside and other kinds of universities? So, how can we understand animism? Animism is spirit worship. It is the practical religion, the primary religion of over 100 million tribal people scattered throughout Africa and New Guinea and the Pacific Islands in North and South America, in Australia, New Zealand, India and Japan. That's according to Operation World. Officially, they are animists. That's their first religion. But elements of basic animism are also adhered to by some Muslims, Buddhists, nominal Christians, especially Muslims in Indonesia. Many of them are actually animist Muslims. And many so-called Christians in the Congo and in Madagascar are also animistic Christians, and so on. This is how the Maori were in New Zealand. Now, some people say they were the original inhabitants of New Zealand. That is not true. The Maori ate the original inhabitants of New Zealand. But, you know, well, yeah, don't they teach you that in anthropology at university? And in fact, the original inhabitants of North America were also eaten by the Indians who came across the land bridge from Alaska, came in, and they cooked and ate all the original inhabitants. So this business of the original inhabitants is often not honest, because often the original inhabitants are actually inside of the other people. What's also extraordinary is, have you noticed how the New Zealand All Blacks team, they use the haka? And you know what the haka is? It's a curse. You're putting a curse on your enemies and say, we're going to eat you. Literally. And so you've got these white New Zealanders doing this whole demon dance with their tongues out and eyes looking like they're possessed by something. And it's, you know, it's a bit funny to watch it. But when you think about it, what kind of idiot does that sort of thing? Yeah, I mean, really. Here's a map by Patrick Johnson of Operation World. The darker the green, the higher the percentage of Muslims. The darker the yellow, the higher the percentage of Christians. The darker the blue, the higher the percentage of witchcraft or animistic adherents. That just gives you a picture of the three main religions in Africa and their distribution. You can see the whole of North Africa is solidly Muslim, and the centre of Africa is more Christian, but you've got smatterings of animism stretching around. In our country, the Vendans are the highest percentage of animists. Venda's got a very high percentage of animists. In fact, when I went to Venda, I was shocked to find that they had, now we're talking about 1990s, they still had a beauty competition where the most beautiful girl in the country was sacrificed to the crocodile god. Married to the crocodile god, they call it, but I mean, she's thrown in, sometimes kicking and screaming because they're not always convinced about this being a good idea, but in Lake Fundudzi, and nobody is allowed to see Lake Fundudzi. Well, I've seen it, but I was in an army helicopter, the Venda Defence Force, flying over it, but you're meant to be killed if you see Lake Fundudzi and you're not a Vendan. Okay, so when you break down the religions of the world, this is again Operation World, 32% of the world's population claim to be Christian, which includes Protestants, Independents, Anglicans, Catholic, Orthodox, and so on. Then you've got the Buddhists in three main categories, 6.5%. This is what we're talking about now, animists, which are 10% of the world's population, roughly, about. And you can also see the Muslim categories between Sunni and Shiite and so on. And then, of course, the Hindus with their different caste system. The Hindus are 13%, Muslims are about 22%. And that gives you a rough idea of the breakdown of religions. We are primarily talking about the animists, or witchcraft or voodoo religions, but they're pretty wide. They're also shamans and spiritists, and they might call themselves Wiccans, things like that. You might be interested to notice, here's the world's population rate. Okay, that's population growth rate. Every branch of Christianity is growing faster than the birth rate, and Islam looks like it's quite fast compared to Hinduism and Buddhism. But notice the ethnic religions are decreasing. They are slowly disappearing. Notice with the Christian categories, the charismatic are growing the fastest, followed by Pentecostals, Independents, Evangelicals, Anglicans, and mainline Protestants. All categories of Christians are growing somewhat. The Catholics are decreasing dramatically, the Orthodox decreasing very rapidly as well. That just gives you a bit of an idea on church growth. Operation World is a mine of great information on missions. Animism includes necrolatry. That means the worship of the souls of the dead. The tribal people tend to regard departed ancestors as part of the clan, and they fear the harm that the departed can do to the living, especially if they die unnaturally. They come back to haunt the people. Spirit worship is also a natural part of animism. Tribal religions believe in the existence of personal spirits or demons, as well as impersonal spiritual forces in nature, which inhabit the earth, the air, the fire, the water, the trees, the mountains, animal life. So they've got sacred mountains, sacred trees, sacred fire, all that sort of thing. Life for them is dominated by a host of taboos, things you cannot do, and rituals which must placate the spirits. There's always witch doctors, although they could be called shamans or priests. They are expert mediators who know the proper incantation, spell, abracadabra, or whatever, and what sacrifices are needed at times of sickness and disaster to placate the spirits, sacrificing a chicken, goat, whatever, or person. There's always magic. You get two types of magic, imitative magic and contagious magic. So imitative magic seeks to bring harm to an enemy by attacking a representation of him, like a voodoo doll, sticking needles in a voodoo doll. And some movies want to suggest it's all real and the person's going through pain because this person's sticking a needle in his voodoo doll. And then you get contagious magic, which is the connection between a person and his hair clippings, sweat, nail clippings, spits, anything like that. And I mentioned at the camp how, according to Swazi history, the reason why King Shaka was defeated, the one time he was defeated by the Swazi, was because the Swazi witch doctors got hold of some semen of old Shaka, and they used this to cook up a powerful muti medicine, which gave the Swazi forces the ability to win a victory over the Zulu. And forget about military tactics or anything else, it's all about magic. And they're presenting that as actual history in Swaziland. The blood of an animal or a person may be drunk in order to gain the strength of that animal, or in the case of cannibalism, a person. So you have a character like Idi Amin, who ate the brains and the hearts and the liver of his enemies, including the Archbishop of Uganda, whom he shot in his home and literally put his body and everything in the deep freeze and was eating and snacking off the Archbishop for quite a while. When you come across this sort of thing, as I saw this in Mozambique, a skull, human skull with bones around a fire. I mean, what does this tell you? Cannibalism. Yeah, exactly. In Rwanda, I walked knee-deep in this church in corpses. 1,200 dead people in a church killed by witchcraft adherents during the Rwandan Holocaust in 1994. The skulls of people put on a pulpit area, piles of skulls, and you'll see cracks in the skulls from knobkerries. You'll see marks of assegais in some skulls. 1 million machetes or pangas provided by Red China to the MRND government, the Hutu government in Rwanda, to carry out the genocide which killed at least 800,000 people in Rwanda. The head of the Canadian forces, General Romeo Dallaire, who is in charge of the UN Operation Unimir in Rwanda in 1994. General Romeo Dallaire wrote the book and oversaw the making of the film Shake Hands with the Devil, where he testified that 4 months before the genocide, he was warning the General Secretary of the UN, the President of America, who happened to be Clinton, their Secretary of State, and Warren Christopher, and this Madeleine Not So Bright at the UN, and so on, about the plan of this genocide. And he sought permission to raid the warehouses where this million machetes were that were about to be distributed to the whole country, seized the machetes. And he is forbidden by the General Secretary of the UN not to do it. And at the end of his book, Romeo Dallaire says, could the Rwandan Holocaust have been prevented? Of course. Should we have done more? Yes, of course. Is the UN responsible? Yes. And this is a man who is a hardcore liberal, a serious believer in the UN. He actually went to Rwanda thinking he was going to do good being part of the UN. So the man was shattered because he is a humanist who really believed the United Nations was out there to help people and to save lives. So he is absolutely shattered, and his book is required reading for anybody who thinks the UN is out there to actually improve the world. Just a few pictures, some of the victims, some of the Tutsi victims of Rwanda. Well, when I was at the battlefront in South Sudan, I was offered this Arab skull to take home, and I said, no thank you, I'm not Shakespeare or Macbeth. I mean, to be or not to be, what would I do with a skull? I mean, how would you explain this at customs? But anyway, that's the idea. Put the skull here, and do you know how many philosophers were required to have a skull on their table? You see a picture of Martin Luther doing his studies with that there, and it was to remind them of their mortality. Okay, change is not always progress. Technology does not necessarily mean that a person's religion or faith is catching up. You get animists, you can be carrying an AK-47 using a iPhone or whatever that is. It's an iPod. Okay, there we go. So, I mean, they might have a more advanced phone than I do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are more advanced on other ways. So, yes, I mean, he may look at mine and he say, not even worth stealing, you know. Is that the best you've got? And yes, not interested in those sort of things. But a lot of people who think technology is advancing people. Not necessarily. Technology might be making us the dumbest people on the planet, because R.C. Sproul said in my hearing, we could be living in the dumbest generation in history. Don't let the technology fool you. And then he said, you used to have to be able to debate in Latin to enter university. Now you have remedial English in university. And you get university graduates who have accounting degrees who have to be taught basic mathematics in classes at Old Mutual after they've been employed. So don't think we have a very intelligent population. When you look how people are so dumbed down, read the sermons of Charles Spurgeon. Go back to the Puritan sermons of John Owen, for example, Richard Baxter, and then see these people could sit there for an hour-long sermon, intricate detail, referring to people without explanation that most of our theological graduates wouldn't be able to recognize. We have to get the dictionaries off the shelf to work out, who is he talking about? What is this? And so there was a time when the Christian populations were better educated, better informed than present. Still speaking about animism, the definition is it includes fetishism, superstitious belief that there's some spiritual energy or force in charms, amulets, or fetishes. For example, I know it was very popular when I was growing up that boyfriends and girlfriends would give one another a St. Christopher, and a St. Christopher medallion on the back engraved. And the St. Christopher is meant to keep you safe, because St. Christopher is the patron saint of travelers. Remember, he's the one who had to carry people across the river and that sort of thing. So there you get some Middle Ages saint that suddenly turned into a charm. I remember my dad had a St. Christopher medallion on his dashboard of his car, and he explained that was to keep us safe when we drove. That's not unusual. And even Christians wearing crosses around them thinking it's going to get some magical power.
Is that
Yes.
like dream catchers? Is that
Oh, dream catchers are definitely part of the same deal. Yes. You've got no end of fetishists. You can go to Parliament and you'll see some of these people in their suits even. Their hand goes out and you can suddenly see the goat skin around their wrist, or goat skin around the ankle just underneath the suit trousers. And sometimes you'll see the kids running around, they've got these beads around their stomach, and it's often a specific thing that's been bought from the witch doctor. They don't give it away free, and it's meant to protect them from sickness or whatever. I've had people explain to me, Frelimo soldiers, that they had witch doctors come and do ceremonies for them that would make the Portuguese bullets turn to water. It didn't work, unfortunately, but when they went back to the witch doctor to complain, our unit got wiped out and things like this, and then they'd say, oh yes, well, how did you do it? Oh, you did it in the shade, you should have done in the sun. Or, oh, you applied in the sun, you need to do it in the shade. So somehow it's always your fault. It's like these televangelists. You buy this, that and the other, you're going to get your healing, whatever, and then they find out somehow it was still your fault that it didn't work. You didn't have enough faith. Then you get naturism, the personification and worship of the forces of nature. So you've got these people who worship Ra, the sun god, the moon god, like Mohammedans. People who worship the stars. The astrologists believe that under the stars that you were born, it determines what's going to happen to you today and every day and so on. So that means 1/12 of us are predestined to do this sort of thing, because 12 of us are Aquarius and 12th are Pisces and Taurus, and a lot of bull. Fire, of course, many worship the fire or the volcanoes. In Japan, it's Mount Fuji, storms and animals. So in ancient Egypt, they worshipped the sun, Ra. The sacred cow is worshipped by the Hindus in India. I mean, a sacred cow can wander into the village and eat up the food on the marketplace, not a problem. Sacred mountain of Shintoism in Japan. Naturism or animism naturally leads to idolatry and normally to polytheism, the worship of many gods. I mean, if you're worshipping the crocodile god and the snake god and all these sort of things. For example, in Zimbabwe, they've got the rain goddess, and you'll see a statue of a big snake at Kariba Dam, Nyami Nyami, and this is the snake god, the river goddess. And there's an interesting book out in the Rhodesian War called The Rain Goddess, because the terrorists used witch doctors to recruit a lot of people to join the terrorists on the basis that the white men had angered the spirits by damming up the waters of the Zambezi in the Kariba Dam, which happened to provide electricity for all of Zambia and Rhodesia and other things and that, but never mind that. But the dam was angering the spirits, and so they convinced the Rhodesians to build a statue to appease Nyami Nyami, this snake goddess, and so, or the river goddess, and so, but she's a snake. And this, you got a whole lot of, I mean, to think that there were some district commissioners in the Rhodesian internal affairs who were persuaded to build an idol to a rain goddess to appease the spirits. Not that it helped, but anyway. Nature worship, rituals, sacrifices are all intended to guarantee fertility for you and for your crops, your cattle, sheep, goats, and all that. Now, human sacrifices are an extreme example of this in nature worship, and it does happen. Then you get totemism, brother, sister, kin, emphasizing the unity of the clan with some sacred plant animal. So the totem poles of the Indians in America, for example. Do you know that at the Canberra World Council Churches Conference, they had Indian witch doctors from Canada, that's Canadian Indian witch doctors, did a whole fire ceremony, and all the delegates of the World Council Church had to pass through the fire, jump over the smoke, to go into this, where they were presented with a big totem pole. And Castro, not the Cuban one, but the one who was the General Secretary of the, I think Emilio Castro was General Secretary of the World Council Church at the time, he somehow got this damn totem pole into the plane and shipped it back to Geneva to put in the entrance to the World Council of Churches offices. So the imbecility of people in the West towards this animism is beyond imagining. There are 4 characteristics of animism. Number 1, the whole of life is pervaded with and governed by fear. Obviously, a lot of fear. There's the absence of love and the absence of hope. The people feel like they're just helpless victims. Also, of course, you do notice that the women carry the heavy weights and the men carry, if anything, their cell phone. Number 3, there's no moral absolutes. Sin is seen as a violation of culture, custom, and spirit forces. For example, this woman's going through a ritual purification for adultery, which isn't necessarily adultery. It could be just that she cooked for somebody else. It's not a moral crime, adultery. It's now a violation of some custom. And then you always get fatalism, a sense of helplessness in the face of external forces. Heathenism does not deny God as much as ignore him by worshipping natural forces. So it's not that they're atheists. They're more like polytheists. And they also believe mysterious demon powers can be appeased through magical ceremonies and sacrifice. This woman here is biting the head off a live chicken in Haiti. What does the Word of God say? Leviticus 19:26-31. Do not practice divination or sorcery. Do not cut your bodies for the dead, or put tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Now I remember, shortly after I was converted, it came to my memory that my father told us how when his mother died, he had sought out a clairvoyant medium to contact his departed mother's spirit. I also remember going with my dad up to Rhodes' grave up at Matopa's in Worldview in Muddabeeland, and on the way there was a village where they advertised the witch doctor will throw the bones for you. And my dad stopped for a laugh, went in to the witch doctor to throw the bones for him, and he came out quite impressed, saying, wow, he knew things he couldn't have known. There is something to this. He had no idea that this is real. The Lord brought this back to my memory after I was converted, to renounce these ancestral powers that have put a bondage, because this is occult. You can't play the fool with spiritism. I also remember as a kid going to visit friends and relatives on farms in Rhodesia, and while the parents were drinking or playing bridge or whatever it was, we were playing glassy, that's occultism. You're playing the fool. This is nonsense. Not a good thing. I remember us being involved in, for example, my mother at one point got into transcendental meditation, took me along, and they give you a ceremony. You've got to bring some fruit and a white handkerchief and some flowers, and it's put in front of some idol, and there's incense being burned, and they give you a special name that you've got to repeat over and over for 20 minutes as you clear your mind of everything. And this is like opening yourself to demonic possession. So there's a whole host of things that the Lord brought back to my memory, not immediately. I mean, sometimes these things came to my mind years after I was converted. These are things I need to break with and renounce.
When I was overseas, a friend of mine was very into New Age things. And one time I was at their house and I saw they had this little those old spinning tops, almost teardrop shaped. Like a metal ball like that on a string. And I was like, what on earth is this? And they were like, no, it's to see if your chakras are open. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is hilarious. Like, what are these people talking about? And they're like, John to text it, John to see. And I was so I was like, of course, this is absolute nonsense. And I was like, yeah, go for it. Like, I'm going to prove you wrong, kind of thing. And I could hold it over my head or over my chest or my knees or whatever. And sometimes it wouldn't spin, and then sometimes it would. And I'd be like, no, you're just moving it. Like, this is ridiculous. So he's like, okay, do you try to do it to me? And I'm like, okay, now we're going to see. I was flabbergasted. These things are real. Like, that's how scary it is. I hold this thing dead still, and it would be still, and you move it up the body, and then dead still, and then it would start spinning or whatever. And so there's definitely those kind of spirits and stuff out there, and you don't want to mess with.
Well, I remember going up Colton Tower when Colton Tower was still there, before it turned into a big squatter camp, richest hotel and centre. They even had a world-class ice rink below and so on. I mean, all just boarded up and chaos now. Goats being tethered there. But at the time, at the top of the Colton Centre, which is the high point, you could go out there in a viewing platform, see all of Joburg. There they had a tourist place selling witch doctors' bones for tourists. And when my relatives from England came out here, they bought some of this rubbish and were showing me, oh, look at this one. Not a good idea. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations, heathen there, Let no one be found among you who sacrifices a son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, who interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or a spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. And because of these detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 18, key passage, along with Leviticus 19. So these are key passages to understand. Now here you will see people gathering in Zionist gatherings. Now the Zionist Christian church mixes elements of animism with an Old Testament type of faith, but they're very weak on Jesus and on the Holy Spirit, and they understand Trinity is normally not there. They've got ancestral worship mixed with some form of Old Testament type of religion. And you will see outside towns a lot of people in variations of the Zionists, and you find them open to the gospel. If you can go and show them from the Bible teachers, they'll listen. But generally speaking, they're not well taught in the Bible. They respect the Bible, but there's normally a mixture of animism. And you've really got to watch out for this. And in fact, John and Aubrey can give you more about what they've seen in Zimbabwe on that. Africa Mhlopi has written an excellent book, Christianity and the Veneration of Ancestors. Should a Christian consult the dead? The only book I know of published in South Africa dealing with this subject, and very useful insights in this. And Africa Mhlopi, he's been here in this mission and in our boardroom, and we stock his book in our bookshop. Now, an example of a country that's been dedicated to ancestral spirits is Haiti. Wall Street Journal notes in its article, Haiti and the Voodoo Curse, the cultural roots of the country's endless misery. Wall Street Journal, this isn't a Christian publication yet. Despite Haiti having received billions of dollars in foreign aid over the last 50 years, it remains the least developed country in the Western Hemisphere. Haiti has defied all developmental predictions. Operation World reports Haiti is the poorest state in the Western Hemisphere. Over 75% of the population live on less than $2 a day. Effective unemployment is around 70%. Could be more. You don't need a map to know when you're flying over Haiti or Dominican Republic. Yes, this is even a rainy season. Haiti is 98% deforested. Haiti has some of the worst pollution, drought, famine, rapid rise of drug abuse, spread of AIDS in the Western Hemisphere. That means in all the Americas. An estimated 75% of the population are actively involved in voodoo or witchcraft. Haiti is at the top of the corruption index, as something in the region of 25% of the police are on the pay of the drug lords and gangs. You remember the massive earthquake near 2010, one of the worst natural disasters ever hit the Western Hemisphere, over 300,000 dead. Now, that sounds bad, but let me tell you something even more shocking. The same year, there was an earthquake 10 times more intense on the Richter scale in San Diego, Chile, with virtually no death toll at all. I don't even think it broke the 2 digits. It was in a single digit, the deaths. So San Diego in Chile has a 10 times worth earthquake with virtually nobody killed. But Haiti has 300,000 killed in a much less earthquake. It wasn't the intensity of the earthquake, it was the building code of their buildings. The buildings were so badly built. The only building left standing on the whole airport was the hangar of Missionary Aviation Fellowship. So when the UN and actors like Harrison Ford flew in his private little plane to take some aid there, they all stayed in and used the Missionary Aviation Fellowship hangar, phone and everything. The media gave all attention to what Harrison Ford did in his one flight of his one Cessna and ignored the thousands of flights of relief done by MAF. MAF was the first on the ground, as they normally are, and they did the most, and they got zero attention from the media. So when you hear the media gives you all the news that's fit to print without fear or favor, you can just laugh. At its inception in 1803, Haiti was dedicated to Satan. In 2003, Voodoo was declared the national religion of Haiti, and Haiti was again rededicated to Satan. The Wall Street Journal quotes Cameroonian development expert Daniel Etoga Manuel as observing Voodooism is one of the principal obstacles to progress in Africa. Daniel Itonga observes Haiti's culture is powerfully influenced by religion, voodoo. Voodooism is one of the spirit-based religions common in Africa. It is without ethical or moral content. Its followers believe that their destinies are controlled by hundreds of capricious spirits who must be propitiated, you know what that means, appeased, through voodoo ceremonies. Animism is a progress-resistant force, quoting again from this Cameroonian economist. The Wall Street Journal, again, I'm deliberately trying to refrain from reading from Christian reports. The Wall Street Journal observes a Haitian child is made to understand that everything that happens is due to the spirits. He's raised to externalize evil. Evil doesn't come from the heart of man. Evil comes from the spirits out there. And to understand he's in constant danger. Haitians are afraid of one another. I mean, your neighbor could put a curse on you. You'll find a high degree of paranoia in Haiti. People don't get sick because of hygiene problems. They get sick because somebody's put a curse on them, you know. Animism is spirit worship. It involves necrolatry, the worship of the souls of the dead. Witch doctors are shamans, expert mediators, so they're looking at the right incantation. Animism is a religion which sees a spiritual force behind every event. Many objects in the physical world have some spiritual significance. A tree, a rock, a mountain, and so on. Anyone know where this picture's taken? Eastern Cape. Eastern Cape, yeah. Transkei. Animism seems obsessed with invoking good luck and avoiding bad luck. You know what they're doing? These are teenage boys going through circumcision ritual in their teens. Highly dangerous. Many die. I mean, hundreds have died of complications arising from the circumcision rituals. Each community is seen as having their own sets of gods and spirits, and these are territorial. Fear plays a major role in the life of the animist. They see the world as full of spirits, omens, spells, and forces. Through magic, through divination, through sacred rituals, they seek protection to appease the gods, the spirits, and the ancestors. They observe numerous taboos and prohibitions and observe sacred places. Here's, for example, strangling someone to death, and they don't even have to tie his hands because he won't resist. He believes this is what the spirit said has to be done. In Haiti, there's a sacred tree where a pact with the devil was signed over 2 centuries ago in blood. Animists see a whole host of objects as sacred with sacred power. They recognize sacred persons, they observe sacred actions, and one of the many is the circumcision rituals on young men in the Xhosa tribe. Many hundreds of young men have died from these dangerous circumcision rituals, which are thoroughly unhygienic. During the World Cup 2010, there was a lot of publicity given to this Burmese rock python owned by the Sangoma in Yanga, who said that his python was able to communicate with him as to who would reach each match, and gamblers paid the Sangoma for the predictions of this rock python.
I had a friend at school that told me about this guy, and he said he has like a convertible, and he'll park on the beachfront and just leave the snakes there, but no one will go near his car.
I'm not surprised. I'm sure the convertible was well paid for by people seeking predictions. The SPCA took the snake into protective custody, finding the snake to be underweight, suffering from dehydration, mouth rot, pneumonia. They confiscated the python to give it medical care. The 25-year-old Sangoma, Siabonga Matwetwe, said that the SPCA do not understand Sangomas. Everything I said did not make sense to them. And I would agree, it doesn't make sense to me either. The High Court in Pietermaritzburg found 28-year-old Smangaloso Ngabani guilty of murdering his own 17-year-old baby in a ritual killing. Amini Zaba was stabbed by her father 6 times in what the state witnesses described as an offering to the ancestors. Ngabani said he heard voices that told him to do this. I mean, you don't need to guess where those voices came from. 2 teenage girls in Johannesburg were doused with petrol and set alight in a satanic ritual. The provincial police spokesman said the girls were tied up by their friends, with friends like that, who needs enemies, and burned in what seemed to be a satanic ritual. The Star quoted Isabel Little of Teenage Advice Forum on Live Talk that Satanism is not spoken about very often. She said there was an incident in Cape Town where a mother reported a teenage daughter kidnapped, taken to a satanic church where another teenager was murdered. She managed to escape but was very traumatized. Police investigated the incident but was never mentioned in the media. We always hear rumors about Satanism, she said, but it's not something people are talking about. We would like them to come forward so this can come into open. There was a policeman who published some books about Satanism in South Africa about 20 years ago. And he was involved, he's in a specialized unit, and then a unit was shut down. They no longer have a unit looking into occultic crimes, because Satanism is now considered to be a legitimate religion in the country. In Uganda, the government is setting up posters in playgrounds and on roadsides warning of the danger of abduction of children by witch doctors for child sacrifice. Police have investigated hundreds of cases of child sacrifice in Uganda. They mutilate bodies, and children have been discovered, abandoned bodies at roadsides with body parts missing. The Anti-Human Sacrifice Task Force, not human trafficking, Human Sacrifice Task Force, reports that there's a growing belief that when you sacrifice a child, you will get wealth. This is back to Baal worship. This is just old Baal worship.
A few years ago in Ponta, there was a guy, he must have been like a Satanist or something, and he chopped up his wife in anger, like all the limbs and like ripping like into pieces, and brings it back and put it in different parts of the town. The black limbs and stuff.
I trust he got arrested. Glad it's against the law in some countries. There are people who are willing to buy these children to be sacrificed for the prosperity of their business. The UK-based charity Jubilee Campaign reports they know of over 900 cases. Now, this is a few years old report. There's obviously more since, but over 900 cases they knew of human sacrifice in Uganda alone. Churches are singing a song, "Heal Our Land, End Child Sacrifice," in Uganda. The BBC sent an undercover reporter who filmed a local witch doctor who explained how the sacrifice of a child is the most powerful spell. And the witch doctor was recorded saying there are two ways of doing this. We can bury the child alive in your construction site, or we can cut him up and place him in different places and put the blood in bottles of spiritual medicine. This is a report by BBC. In South Africa, you get idiots advertising this. Dr. Uber pays for body parts. 5,000 rand for eyes, 1,800 for breasts, 2,500 for tongues, and so on and so forth, and kidney, and they're even offering from body parts of rhinos. Now, this is given with cell number. They're selling body parts. Now, how is this not able to be stopped and these people not able to be arrested? Publicly advertising like this? In a rush to get money, sell body parts. When he says the best prices for all your body parts, I'm sure it's not people selling their own body parts. They're probably getting somebody else who's probably not a volunteer, if you know what I mean.
Is it like now in South Africa?
This is in South Africa. There's the cell number. Yeah. Oh, it's got his email address as well. uberclinic@gmail.com. There we go. If you've got some body parts or something. Safe, quick and fast, 24-hour recovery.
What?
Yeah. Whip out.
Your eyes back in 24 hours.
No, recover from the operation. No, you'll still be blind. But Sindifedi Spogota Messina of the National Executive Committee of Traditional Healers Association claimed that the roads of South Africa are haunted because whites have not fetched back the spirits of their dead from roadside accident scenes. He explained that the growing Christian tradition of putting up roadside memorial crosses and flowers at the scene of an accident stops the soul of the deceased from departing from there. He claimed that roadside memorials are causing accidents because the white people do not appease their loved one's spirit. He said in African traditions the spirit of dead ones brought back home from the scene of the dead. Some use a branch from a young tree to seep up the spirit and take it to the body, which must be buried in the ancestral area. You go to Kalich and try and find a cemetery. There might be one, but I haven't found it yet. I've even flown over in helicopter. Because they all go up to Transkei and Ciskei to be buried. They don't consider that, this isn't the home, therefore they can't bury the people here. And it's a racket. The company, for example, we had one of our people had an ancestor die and needed to borrow a phenomenal amount of money, in the tens of thousands of rands, to have the body transport up to Transkei. So we offered our bakkie, and one of our workers was willing to drive in a long wheelbase bakkie the body back to to Transcar, which we have done for many people in Sudan when there's been funerals and needing to. So we've used our vehicle as an ambulance and a hearse for all sorts of things, and they were aghast. No, the body can only be transported in a funeral parlor, a hearse, which is of course going to cost in the tens of thousands. And we were offering to help, and they were not in any way grateful. They were just horrified that we could make such a foolish, inappropriate, offensive suggestion. These and many other examples remind us that animism is real, and the consequences of dedicating a nation to ancestral spirits or to Satan is very, very, very dangerous. The scriptures are clear. You shall not practice divination or soothsaying. Give no regard to mediums or familiar spirits. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. So here you've got it. You shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found amongst you anyone who makes a son or daughter pass through the fire. For all who do these things are abominations to the Lord your God. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out from before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. Think of this. Think of how, because of witchcraft, many people lost their lands. And you had, for example, the Belgians, the Portuguese, the French, the British coming in and taking control of lands where the people were debilitated by centuries of witchcraft. But as those French, British, Portuguese turned to witchcraft themselves, they've been driven out of the land and have lost the lands that they once had. And the next people who come, they will also be driven out of the land if they turn to these abominations. For the nations which you dispossessed, listen to soothsayers and diviners, but as for you, the Lord your God has not appointed such for you. Let's get our people into Deuteronomy 18, Leviticus 26. The scriptures are clear. We are not able to communicate with the spirits of and departed ancestors. It is appointed unto man once to die, and after that, the judgment. That's an appointment none of us will miss. There's a great gulf set between the living and the dead, and communication between them is impossible. That's what we're told in Luke 16:26 by the words of Jesus himself. However, many people who think that they're actually communicating with ancestral spirits are actually communicating with deceptive demons, unclean spirits, evil spirits, fallen angels who rebelled and are now in darkness, bound for judgment. So Acts 19:12, Jude 6, Matthew 10:1, these are relevant passages. The power of evil spirits, demons, is limited. They serve the devil, the prince of the power of the air, the prince of darkness, the prince of this world. Occult practice honors Satan, not God. Occultism makes the enemies of God the guiding forces and the source of knowledge. And those who give heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons are departing from the faith. We are commanded not to learn the ways of the heathen. Now, interesting point. My Zulu friend, Fano Sabisi, pointed out to me that he said, you know what we black people think you're doing when you have your braai places? You're worshipping your ancestral spirits. I mean, all of you have got an altar in the back garden, especially the Afrikaners. The Boers all have an altar. And they regularly sacrifice meat there. And they have a ritual, and they only invite members of their own clan there to these ceremonies, obviously, to worship the ancestral spirits. Obviously. And you know, when you moths, members of the Tin Hat, veterans of foreign wars, when on 11th of November you go and you lay flowers at a memorial to the soldiers who've died in previous wars, we know what you're doing. You're worshipping your ancestors. Now, we know that when we go and lay flowers at a grave or at a memorial, we know what we're doing. I mean, it's just a token of remembrance. There's no sense of worship. But to a person from an animistic background, they look and what do they see? They say, you know, you tell us not to do it, but you're doing this yourself. It looks inconsistent. A friend of mine who studied at theological college with me, went to the Congo where his parents had been missionaries. And they had very little success, and next thing nobody would attend their services and nobody would even talk to them, and they felt, I mean, they had a young baby and they had sacrificed a lot to come to Congo, and now nobody wants to talk to them. Finally, they get someone to explain what the problem is. In your home, you've got many tins of food because there's no privacy. People would come in and look at your cupboards and, you know, what's under the counter and so on. And they notice they've got tins of meat with a picture of a cow on the outside, and open up and there's the meat and the cow. and they've got tins of pineapples and peaches and so on. And look what they're feeding their child. There's a picture of a child's head on this jar, and they're feeding their children baby brains. Well, I mean, why would you have a picture of a baby's head on it if that's not the contents? And so from a misunderstanding, people were rejecting the missionaries' message. One mission station we've been to many times, it's been a training ground for a lot of our missionaries, is the Church of Scotland Hospital, Cosh, planted by Reverend James Dalzell in Tugela Ferry. So the Gordon Memorial Mission later became the Church of Scotland Hospital, or Cosh. And in Tugela Valley, you get this Cosh Hospital, the Church of Scotland Hospital, very, very hot. You think yesterday was hot. I mean, these places are very hot. And here's the Church of Scotland Hospital terrain. And so what happened was the founder of the mission, Reverend James Dalzell, retired, went back to Scotland and died. And in his will, he wanted to be cremated and his ashes brought back to be scattered on the river, the Tugela River, which passed by the Church of Scotland Hospital. Reasonable, you would think. The day arrived and a plane arrived in Durban, and a procession of vehicles came from the town, led by the ministers, who received the ashes from the plane, said a prayer, got in the vehicles, drove back, had a service of memorial with the ashes in a chalice on the altar, Lord's table up front. And then they later in procession, singing, went down the river and scattered the ashes of this famous missionary, Reverend Dalzell, on the Tugela River. I mean, you and I know what they meant, but this put the work of missions decades back. Because what are the local people seeing? Witchcraft. You are putting the ashes, the muti of this famous ancestor of yours on the river where we draw our water for washing, cleaning, drinking, everything. You've put a curse. You Christians put a curse on our community. You using your magic, your muti. And it didn't matter how much the Christians tried to explain this. I mean, the eyes of the animists in the village, you're hypocrites. You speak against witchcraft and you do it yourself. And so Tugela Valley, I mean, I think they're still struggling to recover from that very ill-advised requirement of this man's will. This is animism. The Bible teaches us not to fear Satan or his demons, but to stand against them in the strength of the Lord. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind, self-discipline. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. So this is one of the chapters in our Great Commission manual, and those notes are available.